you who were at the 2019 One Door Symposium might remember me talking about the project then, when the resources were still being developed. So now we've actually completed that project, and One Door have asked us to come back and present on what we found, which is fantastic. So what we're going to do in this presentation is I'll give you an introduction to the project. Then Darren, who is a peer worker and who worked as a research assistant on this project for us, will talk about two of the resources in detail and tell you about his experiences of using them with people. And then I'll talk about some of the broader findings from the formal evaluation. Oh, that's me. So this is a collaborative project between researchers with and without lived experience of mental health issues from a number of different organisations, and of course funded by One Door. So as you can see, we come from the University of Sydney, Black Dog, and a whole bunch of other places, so we're a real collaboration. And we also need to acknowledge the other people who are involved in this project, and there was quite a few of them. So our peer workers, who are research assistants, of course, Elise, Nathan, Candice, Darren and Cheryl. And our design students who contributed their design skills for the resources, Angus, Emily, Imogen, Max, Bailey and Lily, and Trang, who was our summer scholarship student who did some of the analysis for us. So lived experience in mental health is, lived experience research in mental health is research that illuminates the perspectives and experiences of people who live with mental health issues and is conducted by researchers with their own lived experience, either as the sole researchers or in teams with other researchers without lived experience. The STELLER team think that lived experience research has the potential to be of direct value to people in their recovery journeys, because people can learn from the wisdom of other people and they can be inspired by other people's stories. Individual stories is one way that this can happen, but lived experience research has the potential to bring together the stories of a variety of different people and show a bigger picture on different issues and topics. So we thought that lived experience research could be another resource for recovery. But of course, a lot of people who aren't themselves involved in research don't even know sometimes that lived experience research even exists, let alone how to access it. And research is often also inaccessible because it's published in journals that you have to pay for, and often written in a way that's quite academic and not very user-friendly or often particularly interesting in the way it's written. So we wanted to develop user-friendly and attractive resources to let people know about the findings of lived experience research. We thought that these types of resources would be useful to people, but of course no one had researched it before, so we didn't really know. So we wanted to present it to people living with mental health challenges and evaluate how useful people found them. So we did a bunch of consultations with people, so peer workers, other people with lived experience, and we eventually chose 6 research papers. They had to have a person with lived experience as a named author, and they had to be on a topic that was going to be of interest to people with experience of mental health challenges. And of course, the findings had to be relevant to people directly in their everyday lives. So we wanted the research to really have information that people could really use, so like strategies to try or views that would help people understand things differently and in a helpful way. So once we'd chosen the papers, we then needed to develop creative and accessible ways to present them. So that process began with a conference at a THEMS workshop, and after that, later a full-day design lab which focused on design thinking around the resources. And people who were involved in that included a range of mental health service users, peer workers, researchers, clinicians, and of course our final year design students from UTS. Then after that design lab, the ideas and the prototypes were handed over to the design students to develop further. So the design students then designed and produced them with regular input from the research team and also from the peer workers who are very involved with meeting with the students to discuss their ideas and how and to make sure that everything was going to be something that the peer workers were happy to present people with. And those of you who were at the One Door Symposium last year might remember Bailey and Angus, who were talking about their process in developing the resources and getting feedback from people at the symposium. So once we had the resources finalised, it was time to test them out. We'd already employed 5 peer workers from South Eastern Sydney Local Health District as research assistants. And of course, they'd been helping out with the design of the resources already. So once the resources were ready, we had a training day. We went through each resource and talked about how it should be presented and came to a consensus about how the peer workers would present that to participants. And because we know that different topics appeal to different people, people got to choose 4 out of the 6 resources, and peer workers presented them with 1 each for 4 weeks. The resources were a podcast, which was about the meanings of recovery, and that was an interview with the 2 authors of the paper, one of whom is
I think it's in the room. Yep.
In the room, yes.
Yep.
So shout out to Helen. The What Helps resource, this one was a set of black and white portraits that had direct quotes from study participants about what they found helped recovery, and on the back of each was kind of a description of each theme. These 2 here, the Hope Box and the Personal Medicine Pack, I won't go into because Darren's going to talk to you about those ones in a bit more detail. The Physical Health Cards was a pack of 26 graphically designed cards about how to get good physical health care. So these were colour matched in pairs, with one card describing a theme of the study and the other including direct quotes and sometimes questions to help people reflect. And then the Meaningful Activity magazine is here, which was a 29-page A5 magazine which showed a variety of activities that people found meaningful and that contributed to their well-being. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Darren, who's going to tell you about bringing the resources to people.
Thanks so much, Anne. And I'd also like to thank Anthony for moderating. It's a very thoughtful introduction, moderating this session. It's a lot of responsibility, and for Gus for getting us all set up. So it's great to see that there's so many people, really interested in lived experience research. So I do wish that I could look out and actually see the faces and the reactions, but I can only imagine how excited you all are. And at times I may become very animated because I am actually quite passionate about the topic as well. So I hope that comes across. So I consider myself actually an accidental researcher, research assistant, and as a budding academic. So I'm on my 30th year of struggling with my own mental health challenges and concerns. And it's just been great to be part of such a passionate team who really came together in weekend after weekend, evenings, many Saturdays. And the hope was that our findings of the study would contribute to the developing of improved resources and support for persons that are struggling with their own mental health challenges. And as Anne said, it's like these, it's so great to know that these papers are getting published. And I wasn't even aware that there was such a thing as lived experience research until I've seen the email come through my email box. So it was quite inspiring to me to be part of it. So thank you, Anne. So I think we'll start with our first resource. We're going to go into our hope box. So again, hope's usually seen as critical for self-recovery. We talk an awful lot about it, but again, it just doesn't show up on our doorstep. So this was I really like to share this one because it actually meant a lot to me. So this resource was actually based on research by Jung, Hancock, Wells, and Honey. So in a 2018 study, they had asked 74 people living with mental health issues to write about an experience that had been helpful or that had helped them feel more helpful. So then they analyzed these responses using interpretive content analysis. And then the STELLER research project translated some of these findings into a very unique circular box, which contains a brief, and I think we might even have And perfect. We've got someone to model the actual. That's fantastic. So there was a brief inside it, which actually just a brief about where this study came from. And again, this was written by, this comes from a lived experience background research. So inside it, there was also a little story which summarized a classic story about Sudoku and the 1,000 paper cranes. So yep. So we had the little cranes there. And it was really inspiring. Now you'll also see a few little textures in the box. So they were really encouraged to make this box their own, because that's really what hope is. It's what does it mean to you? But most importantly, within this little box, there were 7 small white hollow balls, little plastic balls. Each one has a little letter on it indicating a day of the week. So participants were actually told to use the resource however they wanted. It's their box, it's their recovery, they get to choose. But we said, look, maybe why don't you consider doing it, opening up one each day. So one on Monday, one on Tuesday. And inside this little ball were little quotes and key concepts from this study. One of them would be, almost like a little fortune cookie inside it. So one example of the inserts read, so acknowledge your strengths and positive progress. See how far I've come since first being diagnosed. I've many other strengths, including being insightful, gracious, kind, compassionate, brave, and a determined person. So also inside there was a little hand-folded crane, and I do mean small. This is very, very, it was a lovely, inside each of those balls was a little crane. So I think all of my participants actually that chose this box really, really enjoyed the creative aspect of it, and the fact that then they could contribute to it. So I had a couple that would take, they really love positive memes and quotes. So they would write them, sometimes they would print them out and do a collage on top of the box. A few other participants actually put personal belongings inside the box, which reminded them of hope for them. So there was a few that had photos, little scrapbooks, little memento things that actually meant something to them. Now, a lot of people find hope as a positive, and I just want to acknowledge that we did have some people that this is a very challenging concept, possibly even triggering for some people. It can have positive and negative effects and emotions attached to it. For me, this actually sits on my desk at the hospital, as a constant physical reminder that almost 30 years ago, I was admitted to a hospital, non-voluntary on top of it, which makes it really challenging. So my feeling at that time was one of hopelessness. So this actually sits on my desk, and a core part of what I feel that my job is, especially working in the units and supporting some really amazing people, is that my job is sometimes there to hold hope when others really don't feel that there is any hope. So it actually means an awful lot to me. So yeah, on to the next one, which is our personal medicine booklet. Now this resource is based on Pat Deegan's research back in 2005. And she did a qualitative method where she interviewed 29 people, so about their own experiences with pharmaceutical medications. And the findings revealed that the concept of this personal medicine, and it was described in the report as self-initiated, non-pharmaceutical, self-care activities and strategies that served their own personal wellness. So the STELLER research project, we took those findings from Pat's study to create a resource entitled the Personal Medicine Pack. So you'll see that on the screen here. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, it's the symbol on the front actually is a Webster pack, kind of a little medicine pill box, which contains lots of medicines. And when I was unwell, I'd actually had one that would say Monday, I need to take this pill, morning, afternoon, evening, kept me on track. So this was replicated from so taking something that we have some experience around having that the medicine packs, but we wanted to just kind of flip it on its head. So you'll see inside it on the Monday page, which we have open here, So personal medicine is about what you do, not what you take. So this introduced the concept, what personal medicine is, and the two personal medicines provided a quote from a participant. And we asked the reader to consider what things they did for their own well-being. And another really interesting thing was that actually at the end of this book was that there was these self-prescriptions. So we often talk about people self-medicating and stuff like that, but you know, the really interesting thing that was that there was this self-prescription, which was adapted from the Living Edge kit. And I actually did have one of my participants. The others weren't too interested in it, but I did have one participant that really enjoyed writing their own prescription. And there were some really clever self-care tips. And this was the same person that had gone through methodically, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and made notes about what used to make them happy and things that they wanted to do, things that brought them a little bit of joy, peace. And as they went along in this little diary, they described it as a diary, and the quote's actually on the page here. By the end of this diary that they had constructed, they had started to include things that they hadn't done and that they didn't think that they could do. So that was just really, for me, just really heartening to see a person challenge themselves. And by the end of that book, and I did check up with them, and a couple of them they actually did do. So that was actually quite nice. So there was a lot of apprehension around this one, often because when we started to say, well, we're going to talk about some resources, and one's a personal medicine pack. Now that word medicine, there was a lot of initial concern, which was raised initially. Often out of them having negative experiences with medicine side effects. But this was also what was a major motivation for Pat in her study, was a personal experience of schizophrenia and her concerns with the over-prescribing of medication to people. So that, you know, that was interesting, and I did share that with a lot of the participants to say, you know, this is where that study originated from. And when we explained it, often they were more inclined to actually take part and kind of get into the research. Finally, I'd like to invite everyone to actually to our website. So www.stellarhub.com, such as stellarhub.com. Now, you'll notice that on the website there's some tabs. So each tab corresponds to one of our resources. And you can actually experience the podcast, and again, with Helen Glover and Dr. Barbara Tooth, and I think Helen was with us earlier. So they were co-authors of a seminal lived experience research paper, Factors Consumers Identify as Important to Recovery from Schizophrenia. So it's a really, really nice, engaging podcast that you can actually enjoy yourself. And we also have a one of our summary reports that we actually put out to our participants to let people know what we had discovered and what we'd found out. So we'd love for you to join, have a browse through the website, and yeah, we'll continue. Thank you. Anne, over to you.
Okay, over to me. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to finish up by talking about the results of that formal evaluation of the resources. So we had 38 participants who were given the resources. 30 of these people completed an anonymous evaluation survey. So that had a bunch of fixed choice questions about each resource. So things like how interesting they found it, how easy it was to understand, how helpful it was, and whether it made a difference in their lives in various ways. We also did qualitative interviews, so that allowed us to find out in more depth about people's experiences and really what was important to them. And people were asked to talk about things like what resources they liked most, what resources they liked least and why, what they found useful and not so useful, and what they thought of different formats, and they were asked for their ideas to improve the resources. So obviously that collected quite a lot of data, which was really helpful in terms of both improving the resources for the future, for the next iteration, and also for helping us to design additional lived experience resources in the future. And some of the resources we sort of had decided to change a little bit. Others we thought, well, we'll actually provide that in more than one format to cater for different people. So there's a lot of individual things about the resources. Obviously, we're not going to have time to go through all of that, and it would bore you, I'm sure, to tears. So I'm just going to give you a few little samples of the findings. So as you can see there, most participants, so actually more than 93%, said that their overall experience of the program was positive. 60% said it was very positive, and nobody reported a negative experience, which was great. I think a really telling response was that half of the people who filled out the anonymous survey said that they had actually shared what they'd found out from the resources with someone else. So in the interviews as well, people also talked about that. So for example, a couple of people said it stimulated conversations with their family and friends. Several people said they'd shown the resource to someone who was having a hard time or that they thought would benefit from it, or that they'd used ideas from the resources to help other people. So this chart shows people's responses in the survey to questions about how helpful they found each resource. Each of the coloured bars is about one of the resources. So people's responses range from bright green, so extremely helpful, to the dull green, which was very helpful, to the yellow, which was a bit helpful, and then the red ones here, which is not helpful. And the numbers are the numbers of people who gave each answer. So as you can see, most people found the resources to be at least a bit helpful, and most of them found them very helpful or extremely helpful. It was interesting that there was actually a lot of diversity in people in terms of what they liked and found helpful, which we found out mostly through the interviews. And in the interviews, we asked people which resource they liked most and which they liked least. And every resource had some people who liked it most and other people who liked it least. So there was no real standout, one that people loved or everyone hated. And you can see there that the hope box had one of the highest proportions of people that found it very helpful or extremely helpful, but it also had the most people who found it unhelpful. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that diversity, which really, of course, emphasised to us the need to really have a variety of content and present it in a variety of different formats, because different individuals, and we knew this was the case, but it really did stand out. They're going to relate to different resources. And participants themselves in the interviews often commented that they liked a resource more or less because of a particular thing about them, such as being a tactile person or having experiences with a particular issue. And as participant 4 said, I like the idea of different formats because everyone learns differently, and if you do one particular format, you're going to miss certain people's learning experiences. So I thought that summed it up quite perfectly. So we asked people whether they would recommend each resource to other people, and you can see that between 85 and 100%, depending on the different resources, said that they would. So that was really gratifying to see. And I found it interesting that the personal medicine resource, which tended to be a little bit less popular with people to start with, so you can see the smallest number of people, except for physical health, chose that resource, but actually it was the one that everybody said that they would recommend, so that was interesting. We also asked people if each resource had an impact on them in various areas, and as you can see, for all the resources, the vast majority of people reported either a small improvement, so the dull green, or a big improvement, the bright green, in terms of their feelings about themselves and their beliefs about their future or recovery, which is essentially about hope. You can see that 2 people here, and these were 2 different people, actually found that one of the resources actually worsened their feelings about themselves. So that was obviously not what we wanted, especially given we'd made quite an effort and done lots of consultation to ensure that the resources were going to be a positive experience. But when we looked at the other responses from those people, we found that both people had reported improvements in other areas from that same resource. And both actually rated the resource that had made them feel worse about themselves as being very helpful overall. So although that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, you know, we discussed those things amongst the team. And one of our lived experience researchers rightly said, well, it's not really that surprising that they rated resources highly anyway, because sometimes, you know, there can be a discomfort and tension involved with changing ideas or learning new approaches and ways of thinking. And that idea also came out in the interview. So, for example, participant 13 talked about feeling upset but ultimately hopeful. So she said, some of what the participants were experiencing, I experienced those symptoms and I thought it is upsetting. But with what they've set their hopes and things to do, it also made me think, well, then I can still feel hopeful about the future. So given that every individual situation and history is quite unique, it's likely to be quite impossible to ensure that a resource is never going to cause any distress for anyone. And I think that's one of the reasons I think it's really beneficial that the peer workers were involved in talking through and following up the resources with people to provide support in case of any unanticipated negative reactions. In terms of other impacts that the resources had, people told us a whole range of ways in which the resources made a difference to them. These ones are just a couple of the more common ones. So some people said that the resources prompted or motivated them to do things that were helpful for them. So participant 4 said, as I was reading it, I thought, these are the things I need to do. Other people felt that engaging with the resources made them reflect on their own experiences and their strengths and their own journey. So like participant 24 who said, I understand myself a little bit better with what's going on. And others said that interacting with the resources made them feel more hopeful, more positive and more empowered. So for example, participant 12 said that seeing other people's experiences, that's really helped to know that I can do that too. And so those ones were mentioned by, you know, between 17 and 21 people each mentioned those concepts. And which is quite a lot given that they weren't specifically asked about, they were just asked, you know, has it had an impact on you? And so people brought that up themselves. So it was really great to see. So this study is really the first to have really looked at the potential usefulness and feasibility of bringing findings from lived experience research directly to people who are going about their recovery journeys. The findings definitely suggest that lived experience research presented in user-friendly formats has the potential to be a resource that people can use in their recovery. We also found that how the peer workers presented the resources to participants was also important to their experience, and that was more noticeable than we expected. So we initially had planned for the resources to be almost standalone, so not to require too much input from the peer workers, but we found that the peer workers really had an important part to play in people's experiences. But of course this was quite a small scale study as well, so the findings though have definitely told us that it's worth us building on. So we're currently looking to work with partners to start to put together an ARC linkage grant, which we're wanting to use to further develop the resources, the existing resources, and develop new resources, and then also test them with a larger group of people. One of the things that we found, which was quite interesting, was that participants really valued being part of the research project. So they saw it as a way to contribute to what they saw as being really important and valuable research, and it really came out in the peer workers told us about that, but it also really came out in the qualitative interviews. And that was really gratifying, but it also meant that it was a bit difficult to disentangle the impact of the resources themselves from the impact of actually being part of the study. So in our next research, we really want to focus on the use of the resources in normal daily practice of peer workers. So the plan is to develop an online training module to train a large number of peer workers across Australia to deliver the resources. and then ask them to report to us where they've used the resources in their daily practice and the sorts of outcomes that they've observed. So it's a little bit more of a real life concept for the people who are receiving the resources. We're also interested in identifying more lived experience research that has implications for people's daily lives. So finding that research was actually a little bit more difficult than we expected. Most of the lived experience research we found was actually aimed at increasing the understandings or changing behaviour of health professionals. So we'll be more focused on ways to improve the healthcare system or client care rather than things used by people directly. And I think one of the implications of our study really is that although lived experience research focusing on system change is like critical, there's also a place for lived experience research that speaks directly to people who are going about their recovery journey. And along those same lines, we're looking to find out from peer workers and later other people with lived experience what sort of topics and issues they would like to have lived experience research about, and that they would help, that would be helpful to people to hopefully be able to promote research in that area as well. So that's the end of our formal presentation, and Darren and I are both very happy to talk in more detail about anything that people are interested in.
Thanks, Darren and Anne. I think that was a fantastic introduction to the area. And I just, while we will be getting the questions, we've already got quite a few questions. I'd just like people to experiment with the chat box by just putting in the state where you live. So QLD for Queensland, NSW for New South Wales, just so that people can see. I can see some names from people in Queensland, lots from New South Wales, somebody from Victoria, somebody from WA has come in. This Queensland, this is some of the power of this sort of webinar, is that we can get people from across the country, and it's really great for our presenters to see how far this talk is going. So thank you very much for putting that in. Lots from New South Wales, a couple from Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia. Where are the South Australians? So look, thanks for doing that. Now you know where the chat box is. We can get back to some of the questions. And the first one, I've got to say that so many of the people have asked is, where can I get it? So, Anne or Darren, any questions? Any answers to that question?
Yeah, well, that's a tricky question at the moment, and like I said, we're sort of working on getting some more funding for it. Certainly, if people are interested, I do have some resources that I could send people, but not all of them. And of course the podcast is freely available. What we're wanting to do for the next iteration is really get the resources down so that they're quite sustainable and cheap to produce. And they're not expensive. I think the whole kit, I think, ended up being I'm going to say $63 or something like that for all 6, like for one of each. So for all 6 resources. To produce like one of each. So they're quite sustainable in that way, but we haven't organised like a way of, really distributing them yet. But if people really are interested, please contact me and I'll certainly do my best for you, because I'd love to get them out there to people to use. I'm not trying to keep them for myself or anything.
And so we'll make sure that Anne's email address is on the end of this particular webinar, and perhaps Gus, who is our IT person who's supporting this, will be able to put it up on the One Door website. Now, Annie West has asked a question about whether there, which you partially answered, about the benefits of the peer workers who worked on the project, but also the benefits for the students who helped with the design process. Did they understand things better at the end of it? Did you measure that or look at that?
Yeah, well, I think we may have some here, because I did invite them along. So if any of you are there, you might want to comment in the chat box about what your experience was. My understanding from them, from speaking to, is there one? No.
Yep.
My understanding from them was that they learned a lot from the project. I think it was a really good experience from them. They really enjoyed, I think, was working with the peer workers, because we had several times we sort of got around a table, and there were some of the research team, there were the students, and there was several of the peer workers, and they really enjoyed, because they'd sort of come up with the ideas, and the peer workers would say, well, I think my clients would enjoy that because of blah blah blah, or perhaps you should do this differently because I think my clients would like that more, or this isn't, I don't think this would work with my clients. So yeah, I think that was a really beneficial thing for those students. A couple of I feel like they came back with a greater understanding of mental health issues themselves, although I'm sure some of them had personal friends and things like that who also already had experiences, and some mentioned that. But yeah, I do think it was a great thing for them, was a really good opportunity, I think, and they did a great job for us.
Right. Another question about the role of peer educators in LE research. I'm not 100% sure what LE research is.
That would be lived experience research.
Right, yes, that acronym, I should know about it. So the role of peer educators.
That seems like one for you, Darren.
Yeah, but I will happily field that one. Look, as a peer educator as well myself, look, it's really, really, really important that, and again, it's like, if you're a peer, that doesn't mean that you want to be a peer educator. If you're a peer educator and you want to be a lived experience, or you want to be involved in some of that, I absolutely encourage you, to keep your eyes open. I didn't know about it last year, so I think that the previous question was as well too. We didn't do any real deep studies as far as how it affected the peers. We were interviewed at the end, which I think that wasn't the initial concept, but I think we did add those peer interviews at the end. But for myself, it has actually changed my trajectory, and I can actually see myself doing more of that. And I think the two, if you are a peer educator, and you're wanting to present material, I think we're the best to decide that, maybe we should be providing these resources. So if you are a peer educator, absolutely check with maybe shoot Anne an email, or your local universities. A lot of universities now are including that lived experience component, which I think is fantastic. But I think if you are a peer educator and you have that desire, absolutely go for it.
And I think it's a really good role for. I think peer workers are so well placed. And people said, oh, it was the peer workers' enthusiasm that really, you've got to get people into the study, right? You've got to get them to agree to be part of it. And the peer workers' enthusiasm was really important there, and they're just very well placed to be introducing that to people. I just noticed on the conversation, Helen has just said she had a couple of conversations with the design students when they did the podcast, and that they said that they learned a lot and it challenged them. And then one of the students is here, Bailey.
Yay.
Hi, Bailey.
Hi, Bailey.
And he said, hey, everyone, I'm one of the students. It was great learning experience in design thinking and a nice opportunity to be involved in mental health research. Yeah, so it's nice to hear.
Great. Now, Enda has asked whether the webinar can be viewed again, and just to say that this is being recorded, so it will be up on the One Door website, at least I think for us, if you could confirm that. Look, one of the other areas was that meaningful activity was endorsed as a really important thing for many of your respondents. Can you talk about meaningful activity and how you integrated that into the package?
Do you have the magazine there?
Oh, hang on, I do. I've got one here.
Another one of the resources.
Exactly. There we go.
Yes. So this was the paper that we took it from wasn't entirely about meaningful activity, but there was a lot of stuff about meaningful activity in it, and the students really, well, we wanted to focus on that because it seemed important, and so it's just got some quotes from the study, and it's just very beautifully designed. It was really interesting. I sort of wondered whether people would really bond with this one. Though it's really nicely set out, and it's sort of got some stuff from the study and then some quotes, yeah, people really like in the interviews, people really said that they loved it, and they said things like, oh, that it helped them to think about the things that were meaningful to them, and gave them ideas of things that they might like to try, and just made them think more about that idea of meaningful activity. And of course, because I'm an occupational therapist, like we're occupational therapists are kind of meaningful activity obsessed. So I was really happy to hear people talking like that as well. Yeah. So people, and one, there was one lady who said that she was carrying it around in her handbag with her, so that she could, take it out and remind herself. So I thought that's absolutely lovely.
Okay, that's fantastic. Now Gus has put the website for the Stellar Hub up on the chat line again, so people can click on that and go directly to the resource if they would like. Now,
thank you, Gus.
Now, with the I was wondering what I look after young people with mental illness in my clinical work. So I was just wondered a little bit about whether you made allowance for age ranges, or how you took that into account, knowing how broad the sort of the requirements for different people, and how comfortable different people in different ages are with a website as against a printed book or something like that.
Yeah, did you want to comment about that, Darren?
Yeah, Oh, no. Yeah, thanks, Anthony. It really is a great question, and I know the design students were very sensitive to that, and that's where that peer collaboration. And I would often share that, look, when I'm very, very unwell, I have very limited reading capabilities. So my vocabulary will shrink, my concentration may, more than a few words, certain words, or I can't grasp them. So you're trying to get through that fog. So when I'm really unwell, reading is not one of my things. So that's where I might go, well, actually the podcast would be something that I would like. So I think there was we were trying to be very sensitive to having, all the learning needs as much as we could, without also, how do I say it, without dumbing it down, because, we've got some really amazing people, and these are just, challenges that we're going through. But again, it can be this barrier, as Anne said earlier, was, the whole concept was, it's not accessible, and especially even if we were to print it out, if I was to print out this, the actual STELLER report is 78 pages. So even the STELLER report in its academic form is at 78 pages, full of amazing graphs. I don't know. We had some great statisticians that was able to come in and code. I've learned so much. But yeah, it's generated 78 pages around these resources and these experiences that we've had. If I was to print that out and take it over to the subacute unit to somebody that was really unwell, such as myself, it wouldn't mean anything.
And I think one of the things, we knew that people's needs were diverse, and we certainly saw that. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how it would actually be great to present the same concept in multiple ways. And because of that, so young people are a lot more comfortable with electronic things, and would probably like, to have resources that are more presented online, or, in video format and interactive webby things. So it'd be lovely to have those alternatives to fit different people, not only at different ages, but also different habits and different learning styles. So, we're sort of thinking it'd be great to be able to have two alternatives of using the same content, and even for some of them, a short version and a more detailed version, because some people would talk about the same resources, and one person would say, oh, could have been in a bit more depth, it seemed a bit superficial, and others would say, oh, there's a bit too much detail. So,
Now, we're having quite a few questions come in now. So the first question, following up on the meaningful activity, can you describe a little bit more about how people interacted with the meaningful activity, or were they just reading it? That's from Michelle.
Well, Darren's probably more of a, you answer that, Darren, because you.
Oh yeah. Oh no. So yeah, and initially, they would be given the resource, and they would, look, if they wanted to share it with us you know, in the time that we had allotted during that week, absolutely. Often they would take the resources home, interact with it. And the next week we'd schedule a time to sit down with them and say, you know, so were you able to? Because things come up. So maybe they wanted to, something came up, they couldn't get to it. They thought they was going to enjoy it, they didn't. But the meaningful activities, a lot of them actually did say some of the things that they did do that week because they'd actually read the magazine, and had given them a few ideas. And then they, even though they might have believed that they hadn't been doing a lot of meaningful activities, when they reflected back, they would say, well, you know, actually, yeah, I guess playing with my dog can be meaningful. So so they kind of reevaluated some of the activities. Yeah, that they were doing anyway. So it was just a gentle reminder. You know, there was no giant wisdom in it. We're just reminding them of their inner strengths, things that they're probably usually already doing, and that's what peer work is. And the magazine's really, that's why, you know, I think as a resource for peers going forward, it'll be, you know, an amazing resource.
And there's some kind of little puzzly bits and colouring things. There's some like little bits at the back that we put in as well. And I mean, some people didn't like them, but other people enjoyed doing them as well. So, but yeah, I think people just enjoyed reading it, and because the student really did it beautifully. So I think people made that comment that it's beautiful. Like they liked to look at it because it was beautiful as well. So that was nice.
I think that sort of aesthetic angle is underestimated in so much of health, where things are clunked out in a fairly ugly fashion so often. So
I think it really is, and that's one of the things people said that they enjoyed about them, was that they said they're beautiful. Like somebody's obviously, like someone said, oh, somebody looked like they'd taken a lot of trouble with it, you know, and that meant something to them. Like it meant that it was kind of important.
Now, another question. Can you see these resources being used in a group format? And Michelle's thinking about recovery college courses. How can be done? Darren.
Thank you. Such a great, perfect segue. That was actually something that initially I hadn't imagined it, but I do a lot of group work. And I think, again, you know, whoever we have there from the recovery college, Michelle, yeah, thank you. I actually would love to see almost all of these resources brought to a group setting, because I know that they would facilitate such great group discussions, activities, and I think that's another whole research project on itself. But I would love to see that. I know that it would actually be very beneficial. That's a great question. Thanks, Michelle.
And some of the participants said that as well. And like our peer workers could have done that, but because of the timing and fitting in with people's schedules, it didn't happen mostly in this project. But yeah, people did say, oh, it would have been great to do that in a group, and then you would have heard the opinions of other people. So that was another thing that came out of the interviews, which was interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's just a question about what's on the web. Just to remind us what's on the website, the Stellar Hub website. So is the podcast on the website?
Yeah, so the podcast is on the website. The podcast is the only resource that's on the website, but there's summaries of each of the resources. So the content of the papers, and so yeah, the website doesn't have a whole lot of stuff on it at the moment, but there's the overall summary that we sent to participants. There's a description of each resource and the papers that came with it.
And you'll find that podcast under there's a tab, Concepts of Recovery. So you'll want to look for that, and you'll actually see a link to it within the tab. When you click on that link, it'll take you to another page, and I'm pretty sure that there's a link and also a transcript. So if you don't want to listen, or you might have missed something, or you like the language, there's also a transcript of the podcast.
And some of the participants, because we told them about the website too, and some of them did like to go back and say, well, especially the Hope resources was quite brief. So some people said, oh, I want more information. So they were able to go back and see the longer, more detailed summary of the paper as well.
And Helen reminds us that there are images of all the resources on the website as well.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Helen.
Now, Francisca asks, and we might make this the final question, what are your thoughts on the implications of these resources and lived experience research for clinicians and managers?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think the implications are that lived experience research is something we should probably all be promoting. for clients to make people aware of it. I mean, peer workers are in a beautiful position to do that, but clinicians certainly could also be making people aware that it exists and of some of the findings. At various times when we've talked about ways forward for this project, we've said, oh gee, wouldn't it also be great to do a project about getting clinicians aware of lived experience research and the findings of that. But yeah, I think that's for another project.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say very briefly again, even when some of these things, some of the resources brought up challenging feelings, thoughts, emotions, I think that's a great opportunity to have as a skilled clinician. Use that resource to build an amazing dialogue and around that recovery, what's coming up for them. So I think it would provide a great opportunity to share and expand on what's coming up for them. So the resources would really serve that purpose. And
I think there's an implication for for funding as well. I mean, lived experience research does often have trouble getting. There's lived experience researchers out there who really want to do research, but they have trouble getting funding, and so this is really showing that research can be directly useful to people, and so it's a good argument for getting some funding for it.
All right. So, look, with that, thank you very much. There are other questions about where to get it, and is it on Facebook and things such as that.
It used to be on Facebook, but our Facebook site got shut down. I'll have to tell Franca to.
Yep. Okay.
to
open it up again. Look, this has been a fantastic talk, and it really underlines the role of peer workers and how important they are. And how important it is to have people with lived experience in research, that it brings a completely different dimension which has been ignored in much of the research that, for instance, I've done over the years, and that's it's really important. Now, this is research that's been going on for just a couple of years as against the decades and decades of research elsewhere, so we've got a lot more time to go and a lot more to learn, but building on the sort of foundations that you and Darren have been building, Aaron, I think we'll be going a long way. So thank you very much for this webinar. And as I said, it's recorded, will be available on the One Door website. And with that, I think I'll bring the webinar to a close with thanks of all of our webinar attendees from all across Australia.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so with that, we'll bring the webinar to a close, and I'll invite you to the next webinar, which is Understanding Mental Illness from Free Training. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.